So let's use some of the sourdough discard to make a loaf of yeasted bread. You want to start with 100 grams of your starter. This one's been fed for a couple of days. It still has plenty of instant yeast in it. To that, you're going to add 360 grams of water. This is just hot tap water. Take that off the scale and stir it up a little bit. Just make sure all of your starter is dissolved in the water. We're going to add a little bit of instant yeast to this, just so we can get a loaf done today instead of waiting until tomorrow to eat it. You want 7 grams of yeast. It looks like it's about a teaspoon and a half. You're also going to need 10 grams of salt. And then it's 450 grams of flour. I'm going to use 400 grams of organic, unbleached, all-purpose flour. It happens to be from HEB, but that part doesn't matter too much. It is important that you use organic flour, because every flour that's not labeled organic was sprayed with Roundup 3 days before they harvested it, and you don't really want to eat Roundup. That's why people think they have gluten sensitivities. It's because of the crap that we're putting in bread these days. 400 grams of white flour, and then 50 grams of whole wheat flour. Just gives the bread a little bit more flavor without being too strong. Again, take the bowl off the scale and just stir this together. And all you're doing here is just making sure all the flour is wet. You don't want any dry spots or any wet spots. Just get everything moist and combined. You're not going to be kneading this like Grandma used to do. For now, that's pretty much all you've got to do. Just cover it with a towel so it doesn't dry out too much. And let it sit. We'll be back in 30 minutes to fold this. So it's been about 30 minutes. Your dough is risen. Now we're going to fold it so we can develop a little bit of gluten structure. Whenever you're working with wet dough, you don't want to put flour down. You actually just want to keep everything wet. If you put flour down, it's going to immediately absorb all of that flour and it's going to be sticky again. So you need to learn how to work with wet dough. It's a skill that just takes time. It's going to be sticky and messy at first, but then you'll get the hang of it. So you just pour your flour or your dough out onto the counter. Keep your fingers wet. And you're just going to fold this over on itself. It's sticking a little bit, but that's okay. Just get a dough scraper. Scrape all of it together. You're just folding this 6 or 7 times. Put a little bit of water into the bowl, keep it wet. And you just pick it up, set it back in there. Use a scraper to pick up anything else that was on there, on the counter. Drop it into the bowl. That's all you have to do again. Just going to let this sit for another 30 minutes. We'll come back and fold it again. So it's been about 30 minutes again. And this is what it looks like. It's risen again. So we'll just get everything wet. Tip this out onto the counter. We're going to stretch and fold it again. Now, if you're just doing sourdough without the extra added yeast, this isn't going to be every 30 minutes. It's going to be every hour or two, depending on your recipe. Sticking a little bit, so you just use the dough scraper to loosen it up. Water in the bowl. Pop it back in there. Scrape up the little bit that was left and put it in. And that's what you've got again. So I guess I hit the wrong button and I didn't capture the third stretch and fold, and I started pre-shaping it, which at that point you switch from putting water down to putting flour down. You don't want the outside of the dough sticking. You actually want to get a wet side and a dry side. So I'm just going to sprinkle some flour onto the dough, put some on the counter. Turn the dough out onto the counter. Keep your hands a little bit floury. just going to pop all the large bubbles. You want to shape this into a log so it'll fit into the loaf pan. So you want to start with the base of this about the same width as the pan. You just fold over, kind of making a triangle, and you start rolling it up. Just roll it and stretch it a little bit. Sticks, it's all right. Just get your dough scraper, get underneath it. So we've got it about the same size. Pinch the ends a little bit. Put some oil in your loaf pan. Really doesn't take much to keep it from sticking. You don't want oil all over your hands when you're trying to handle the dough. Just drop it in there and you're going to let it sit for another 30 minutes. I've already got the oven preheating at 425 degrees with a pan of water in the bottom to make steam. All the pros have steam injection ovens, but if you just put a pan of water in the bottom, it'll work the same way. So this has been sitting here rising for about 30 minutes. You can tell it's quite puffed up. Just going to get a serrated knife and quickly make 3 marks in it, or one long one, but you just want to score the bread so it can expand without ripping the crust. You're going to put this in a 425 degree oven for 40 minutes with a pan of water in the bottom of it. Alright, it's time to take this loaf out of the oven. Let's see how we did. I would say that looks pretty good, and I already know it's going to taste amazing. We got to let this sit for an hour before you can cut it open because of the moisture. It's a long story, but you've got to let it sit for a little bit before you can cut into it. So it's been about an hour since this came out of the oven, so we're ready to cut it open and see what we've got. That looks like a pretty good crumb. I'm not going to taste it on camera. I know that it tastes amazing. Still pretty moist. It's kind of warm still. Definitely going to hold a big sandwich.